Am I tough enough? Tough enough? Hell yes, I'm tough enough.
You okay, Ed?
Sorry?
You all right?
Yeah.
Ed Milliband, do you think Britain is full?
In terms of immigration?
Yes.
I wouldn't describe it that way, no. I think we've got very high levels of migration. I think that we do need to try and get those levels of migration down, particularly low-skilled migration.
Because they're too high now.
Yeah, but I'm telling you one thing very important. I'm not going to make a false promise on this. Because, look, David Cameron did make that promise on tens of thousands of net migration.
You've got form on false promises on immigration, haven't you?
Me personally.
Your government,
yeah,
your party.
We got it wrong.
You got it completely wrong.
We got it wrong, yeah.
Your figures were farcical.
Yeah, they were wrong.
Yeah.
Let me say two things about this, which are important.
Okay,
let me just make a point about immigration, because you asked me a question, let me answer it. Look, I think that we benefit from our diversity. Immigrants over the years have made a big contribution to our country, but we do need proper controls. Let me just say this, Jeremy. A Labour government would say that if people come here, they can't get benefits for the first 2 years, and we will do something else.
I'm not talking about benefits.
You're talking about immigration.
I'm talking about numbers.
Right, and let me tell you, the way we will...
Supposing we got to a figure of 70 million in 10 or 15 years, population in this country, is that acceptable?
I'm not going to get into your hypotheticals. Let me say, I think we can get low-skill migration down.
So...
I'm not going to start speculating about numbers. No, I'm not saying that.
75 million? 80 million?
Come on.
95 million? 100 million?
Let me say what I'm going to do. Let me say what I'm going to do, because that's what matters, rather than speculating about figures. I want to get low-skill migration down, and I think the controls we're talking about, not just on benefits, but on stopping the undercutting of wages, because people are being brought into the country to undermine the minimum wage, and various other things, I think they will help to get low-skill migration down. But if what you're saying to me is, would it be better for our country, for example, to withdraw from the European Union?
I haven't mentioned the European Union.
No, I'll tell you why I'm saying
this.
You're
making up a question to yourself.
I'm not. I'm saying there's a big choice at this election, Jeremy. There is a choice at this election. I believe that we can bring in controls on migration, sensible controls, but I'm not going to make false promises or put forward false solutions either.
I'm just asking you if you think there's any natural limit to the population of this country.
And I'm not going to get drawn into a speculation about a number.
You don't think there is a natural limit?
No, of course there are limits, but the limits are expressed...
Well, you're keeping them to yourself.
The limits are expressed in the decisions you take, year by year, and I've explained some of the decisions that we'll make.
So, as it seems to you now, there is no figure that you're willing to share with the public?
I'm not going to pluck a figure out of the air about the correct level.
Well, I assume you've thought about it.
Yeah, I've thought about the right thing to do on migration, and we need to have controls on migration, and I've explained some of those controls, but I'm not going to pluck a figure out of the air.
There's no finite limit. Now, you've already conceded that when your party was last in government, it got immigration completely wrong.
Sure.
You were predicting figures of between 5,000 and 13,000 immigrants a year from the expansion of the EU in 2004, and actually something like 400,000 people came in. That's the entire population of Malta.
The reason Labour supports unlimited immigration is because the vast majority of immigrants will tend to vote Labour. Therefore, Labour sees immigration ultimately in the terms of hundreds of thousands of new Labour voters imported each year that will ensure future further election victories. As Jack Straw's quote illustrates, Labour forecast only 13,000 immigrants per year, whereas the actual number was in excess of 240,000 per year. The UK's population growth is significantly running ahead of my forecast of 2010. That implies UK population will reach at least 72 million by 2030. The consequences of out of control immigration can be seen in the impact on public services such as schools, the NHS and on housing, as since 2000 the annual increase in population started to far exceed the number of new builds. That ended the preceding trend for construction to exceed population growth in terms of addressing the UK's chronic long-standing housing shortage, which implies a demand for an extra 1.25 million properties to be built that is driving house prices ever higher.
What else did that government do wrong when you were last in power?
I think there's two things that I would mention in addition to that. By the way, I'm proud of many of the things we did, but two things I would mention. Well, first of all, I think we were too relaxed about inequality. I think the gap got bigger, and I think lots of people fell behind.
Did you borrow too much?
I think that the global financial crisis is what drove borrowing up.
Did you borrow
too much? The figure was too high by the end of our time in government as a result of the global financial crisis. Well, I'm saying the figure was too high as a result of the global financial crisis.
Did you spend too much?
Well, I think there were spending programs that maybe weren't as good as they could have been, but I don't believe, no. That I don't believe, no,
It's a clue, come on.
No, it's an important point.
Which ones weren't quite as good as they should have been?
Look, it's an important point. No government gets it completely right.
It's a very important point. That's why it's important to have some details.
Yeah, okay, let me just say, I think the overall point was the financial crisis caused by overspending by Labour. No, the answer is no. I think investment in health and education...
You're asking yourself a question I haven't asked you. My question was, did you borrow too much? You think, no, you didn't borrow too much. Did you spend too much? Some programmes perhaps.
Now you're asking yourself questions.
I'm trying to summarise your position according to the questions you've been asked rather than the questions you've asked yourself.
What I would say is, for example, the dome was not a good example of the way money is spent. Governments make mistakes. Governments make mistakes. There are always inefficiencies in government. Of course there are inefficiencies. Probably too many reorganisations of public services which waste money. Of course that's right. But I'm talking about the overall...
Ed Milliband admits that the last Labour government badly overspent, but blames the financial crisis for the borrowing, and repeatedly tries to avoid answering the question by making up his own. However, the reality is that spending under the last Labour government was literally out of control, running a huge budget deficit of 100 billion in its last year that literally threatened bankruptcy as the climax of a decade-long accelerating debt-fueled spending binge, as Labour rewarded its vested interests in the public sector with huge expansion in budgets, including the tripling in the budgets in many cases, such as for the NHS. What happened to GP pay is one of the best examples of financial irresponsibility under Labour, as GP pay literally soared into the stratosphere, increasing by as much as 35% per annum, far beyond the rates of average earnings increases that acted as an incentive for GPs to work less hours, abandoning out-of-hours care that prompted a huge crisis in the NHS. So doubling in GP pay resulted in far worse GP services, which in part contributed to the MP expenses scandal, as when Labour came to power, average MP pay was virtually the same as average NHS GP pay of 44k. So both were in line with one another at that time. However, as this graph clearly illustrates, that the 2003 GP's contract allowed GPs to award themselves huge pay hikes of over 30% per annum at taxpayers' expense, that has lifted average GP pay to 126,000 per annum against 64k for MPs.
I'm a Labour leader going into the election saying we're going to reduce spending outside a small minority of areas. Tony Blair never went into an election saying that.
But what Tony Blair did is Tony Blair's affair, isn't it?
No, it's a point about my approach, Jeremy. I'm not denying the need. I'm not denying the need.
Would overall spending be greater?
No, it would fall.
You would spend less than the Tories. Would you borrow more than the Tories?
There are going to be reductions in outside the protected departments. We're going to be reducing spending.
Yes, I'm talking about overall spending. Overall spending would not increase, it would decrease.
I think it's likely to fall, yeah.
Likely?
Yeah.
It's a bit of a weasel word, likely, isn't it?
No, I'm setting out the direction of travel. I'm saying
Okay, I'm confused about various of your policies, as is obvious.
Under the last Labour government, the economy literally fell off the edge of a cliff. Economic collapse was only brought to a halt by panic, massive, unprecedented money printing by the Bank of England to stuff every orifice of Britain's bankrupt banks with taxpayers' cash and guarantees, and to monetise government debt. The risk is of a repeat of Labour's economic collapse. To imagine that a Labour government would cut public spending is delusional, because it is just not in Labour's DNA to cut public spending, as the last Labour government illustrates, when the budget deficit literally soared out of control and debt and liabilities were multiplying, increasing from 1.4 trillion in 2005 to 4 trillion in 2010. Labour had literally brought Britain to the brink of financial collapse.
Can you help us with another of your policies, the mansion tax? According to your leader in Scotland, this is a way of taking money out of the southeast of England and giving it to Scotland.
No.
That is what he said?
No, it isn't. No, it isn't what he said.
Well, he said specifically there weren't enough properties in Scotland to raise the mansion tax that would fund the Scottish NHS. It was a way of taking money from the southeast of England and spending it in Scotland.
Shall I explain?
Do, please.
So we're going to levy a mansion tax on homes above £2 million. Now, it is true that most of those homes are in the southeast, and it's also true that there are consequentials of that spending for Scotland. That's the way the United Kingdom works.
Consequentials?
Well, it's the way that money gets distributed, and that some of that money will be spent in Scotland. But let me make this point, because it's really important. This is part of being a United Kingdom. If there are young people who are unemployed in Newcastle, and the money for a banker's bonus tax, more of it is raised in London, we help those young people in Newcastle. If another tax falls somewhere else, then we help people across the United Kingdom. If there are poor kids in London, we help them. So that is part of being a United Kingdom. You have redistribution across the United Kingdom. So this is absolutely a principle of a country that stays together and looks after each other.
What about Alex Salmond's other types of blood money that he would like to exempt or exert from England? What about, for example, a promise not to recommission Trident, perhaps move it out of Scotland? Would you go along with that?
No.
No, you wouldn't. What about starting the high-speed rail line back to front, as it were, in Scotland?
No, look, I'm not going to get into a bargaining game with Alex Salmond. Look, he's not...
You are.
No, I'm not.
You are. If you have any chance of forming a government, you will, won't you?
No, don't be so presumptuous. You've got 6 weeks to go. You've got 6 weeks to go.
The Labour Party is fighting a losing battle against the SNP insurgency in Scotland that seeks to take virtually all of the Labour MPs, which means that Labour could only form a government whilst in some sort of coalition with the SNP. And as Alex Salmond keeps repeatedly making clear, that they would hold the balance of power and Labour would dance to their tune.
If you hold the balance, then you hold the power. Any minority government has to negotiate in order to win a majority for its proposal. That's patently obvious, and to deny that is to deny reality. When I faced that reality in the Scottish Parliament, I couldn't say, well, I wish it was different. You had to get down and do your best for the people under these circumstances. And if the SNP are in these circumstances, it'll be very good for Scotland, certainly.
Alex Salmond's statements have prompted the Conservatives to cry wolf once more on the prospects of a Labour-SNP government.
You may have thought that after his defeat in the Scottish referendum, Alex Salmond would have packed it in. Oh no, he has set his sights on a bigger prize. By standing for the constituency of Gordon, he intends to take a seat at Westminster. And with the SNP seats won from Labour in his grasp, put Mr. Miliband into power, and then call the tune.
Unfortunately, this time the Conservatives are right to warn of what would happen during a SNP Labour government, which, as my February election forecast 2015 analysis concluded, would be a catastrophe for the UK. The UK dodged a bullet last September as the tunnel vision SNP failed in their efforts for the UK to disintegrate that would have resulted in a catastrophic breakup of the UK, as I covered at the time. However, the SNP are not done with the UK, for their new cunning plan is to literally bankrupt Britain as part of a minority Labour government, to financially bleed the UK dry, leaving it a hollow husk before declaring independence, as illustrated by SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon's recent statements, to force the UK to print an extra 180 billion of debt to finance spending on vested interests. However, against this, we compare the austerity coalition's debt record that by May 2015 will have borrowed an extra 130 billion more than they said they would in 2010, and in total added 500 billion to Britain's national debt. Now imagine what would happen under an anti-austerity SNP Labour government, who would print at least 1 trillion of new debt that would increase the total to 2.5 trillion, that would result in rampant inflation, i.e. probably exceed 10% per annum. Just as spectacular as being the collapse in the oil price as is the collapse in the SNP's economic master plan for an independent Scotland that was wholly based on reaping huge rewards from North Sea oil exports, where SNP propaganda had convinced many Scots to effectively vote to commit economic suicide, that came close to achieving the catastrophe on the basis of a propaganda implying raising of North Sea oil tax revenues from 7 billion to 11 billion per year, that today, barely a few months later, has evaporated to virtually nothing. So be under no illusion that an inept Miliband government will be wagged by the SNP tail, will be able to do anything other than to plunge from worsening crisis to the next, probably even worse than Gordon Brown's financial collapse, all the way to the disintegration of the United Kingdom. Virtually all of the pollsters point to a Labour bloodbath in Scotland, as they could lose as many as 40 seats to the SNP, with suggested tallies of as high as 57 SNP MPs, as illustrated by May2015.com.
They see you as a North London geek.
Who cares? Who cares? Who does?
Well, it was mentioned earlier by a member of the audience.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when they look at your candidacy for the most powerful job in the land, they look at you and they think, what a shame it's not his brother.
Well, look, you know, that's always not the way I see it, is it?
No, of course it isn't.
No, exactly.
No candidate yet received 50% of the vote. Ed Balls, as the third place, is eliminated and his votes are redistributed between the remaining two candidates. In the fourth and final round, David Miliband in the MPs and MEPs section received 17.812%, in the members section 18.135%, and in the affiliates 13.40%, making a total of 49.35%. Ed Milliband in the MPs and MEPs section received 15.522%, in the members section 15.198%, and in the affiliates 19.934%, making
So Ed Milliband is the new leader of the Labour Party and the opposition.
Look, you need a toughness in this job. You need a toughness. People have thrown a lot at me over 4.5 years, right? But I'm a pretty resilient guy. And I've been underestimated at every turn. People said I wouldn't become leader, and I did. People said 4 years ago, he can't become Prime Minister. I think I can. You're saying I can't win a majority. I think I can. So let people underestimate me. But what I care about is what is happening to the British people in their lives. And I think I can change it. And I know I'm the right man for the job. That's why I'm sitting here. And that's why I believe that I'm the best choice to be Prime Minister.
Ed Milliband, thank you.
Thank you.
You okay, Ed? Huh? You all right?
Yeah. You.
Current opinion poll seat forecasters, as illustrated by New Statements May2015.com, now put Labour marginally ahead of the Conservatives, which compares against my long-standing forecast as follows. The remaining balance of 558 seats, split according to the consensus view such as May2015.com, would result in Labour leading on 281 seats against Conservatives on about 277. However, this analysis suggests that the opinion polls are grossly underestimating the number of seats the Conservatives will actually win on May 7th, where there is even a chance for the Conservatives to win an outright majority, though probability favours another hung parliament. However, given the UKIP surge, it will be tough for the Conservatives to retain their current tally of 302 MPs. As I expect at least 3 will be lost to UKIP and many more lost to Labour, against which at least a handful will likely be gained from the Lib Dems, which therefore suggests that the Tories will achieve a seat total in the 290s. My forecast conclusion is for the Conservatives to win 296 seats at the May 7th general election and Labour second on 262 seats, and the full seats per political party breakdown as shown. Therefore, the most probable outcome is for a continuation of the condemned coalition government on 326 seats, i.e. Conservative 296 plus Lib Dem 30, where any shortfall would likely find support from the DUP's 8 seats. The alternative is for a truly messy Labour, Liberal, SNP supported chaotic government on about 327 seats, which in my opinion would be a truly disastrous outcome for Britain, nearly as bad as if Scotland had voted for independence last September. Another possibility is that should the Conservatives do better than forecast, i.e. secure over 300 seats, but still fail to win an overall majority, then they may choose to go it alone with a plan to work towards winning a May 2016 general election. The bottom line is that the opinion polls do not reflect how people will actually vote on May 7th, when they are faced with the stark choice of a steady as she goes condemn government or take a huge gamble on Ed Milliband's Labour Party. So in my opinion, several millions of voters will choose to play it safe with the condemned government, which thus is the most probable outcome.